Welcome back to the episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. So for everybody listening, imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every big goal you'd ever set, personal, financial, your startup, whatever, was already checked off, right? Like victory lap. Or is it an identity crisis? Wil, I feel like you are either have hit that wall or you're really close to it. So today I want to dissect what happens like when the scoreboard reads game over, but you're still itching to play. I mean, imagine for us, we're too for a living. We help other people define their goals and redefine their goals and keep adding more goals to. I mean, a startup is just a collection of goalposts that we keep trying to kick through and then move to the next one. So how the hell do we reconcile this?
I tell you what, I have run out of goals. Now I say that I'm probably, and you know this, I'm probably busier than I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Every waking hour is accounted for. So when I'm saying I'm out of goals, that I'm probably not quite representing, but something interesting happened to me in the last year, I would say. In the last year, and it's been wildly cathartic, reflective, anxiety driving, etc. In Isn't
it funny how the lack of having something to be anxious about can drive anxiety all by itself?
Oh yeah, well you know this as well. I found plenty of new things to get anxious about. However, here's what's changed. I want to say at a high level that I've run out of goals, and here's what I mean by that, because it's a weird thing to say, and I am so goal oriented. Ryan, every single day, the first thing that I do when I start my day is I make a checklist of stuff that I want to do for the day. I do it 7 days a week. So I do it on Saturday, Sunday. The first thing I do is I get up and I make a list of all the things I want to check off. Even when I go on vacation, I make a checklist of all the things I want to do while on vacation, like read, book, do whatever. And I think it's just because I like checking stuff off, right? So I love goals. But so I wake up one day and I'm 50 years old and I'm like, what are my next 10-year goals? So, it's great, milestone, part of your life. And I sit down and I try to have this brainstorm personal whiteboard moment, and I come up with 0. For a guy who makes goals for a living, that's really sad. It started me thinking down this process. How about you?
I don't think I'm quite there yet. I don't think I'm quite there. I don't think I haven't done all of the things I want to do. We're getting ready to execute a new adventure 2 Fridays from now, actually. By the time you're listening to this, everyone, 4 days from you listening to this, I will be boarding an airplane on the 4th of July, Independence Day. It wasn't intentional. And we're heading off to Madrid. So there's still some stuff to be done there. Now, that's a very personal kind of goal. That's not a business-related goal. But here's one that has been giving me a little bit of peace lately. And it's that while I'm getting closer and closer to having the really big high-level goals that I want to completed, but I happen to have these 3 other little people that live in my house who now have started having some of their own goals. And we're getting to some really interesting stages, right? My daughter's asking me now about college visits and what's career look like? And I'm right, what's it not look like?
Yeah.
And so I think that, and look, I know I'm not going to be as involved in their goals. They won't want me to be, I won't want to be, but there's going to be some sense of how can I enable that? How do I participate? How do I take part in that? Or how do I even just sort of enjoy watching them go through the same struggles that I went through to hit mine? I think that's kind of where I'm at, because to your point, we've done a lot already. We've gotten some of the things, right? I've had a lot of the experiences. I've had a ton of experiences. I've lived all over the world, done a lot of stuff, and have been really happy with it. And so well, I'm kind of in the same boat where I always feel like I need a goal. And yet when I look around at okay, what's the one big ass thing that I haven't thrown a dart at and hit yet? There isn't one, right? I can do bigger versions of some of the stuff I've already done. I could have more of some of the stuff I've already done, but there are very few things left in life other than learning how to make all of the Othello pieces flip over just by passing my hand over it, like the commercial promised in 1984. That I haven't done.
No, I get it. So okay, let's talk about what were these goals supposed to accomplish, okay? So I want to zoom out. And I want to say all of us early in our careers, or early in our lives, some of the folks listening are earlier in their careers. We set up these goals. We have these big milestones that we want to accomplish. A lot of times we start a startup to accomplish some of those goals. I got to say, early in my life, my goals were super simple. My goals were so basic, Ryan. This is I'm 17, 18 years old. I was broke and hungry. And my goal was this: don't be broken hungry.
Don't be broken hungry. Yeah. Reverse my current circumstances. Yeah.
My methodology of what that meant just meant show up at work today, get paid $5 an hour, and eat with that $5 an hour. And I was perfectly fine with that. I want to isolate that moment for a second because I think people think entrepreneurs always have big visions of what they wanted to become in the world. And like they just, what work so hard to make it happen.
Survival.
Yeah, not so much. There are many points in many people's lives where their expectations, and this is a big part, where their expectations are wildly tempered, right? So our goals are often a reflection of our expectations, right? Ryan, I'm guessing you don't have a goal to play professional soccer, nor do I have a goal to play
No.
professional football. Like they're tempered by what we think our realities are.
Yeah.
Now,
both of my knees agree with this decision, by the way.
what's wild about what we do for a living, though, within startups is we know we have the ability to do exponential things, right?
Yep.
Like we could create the next Shopify or Spotify, right? Like that actually is possible. Not likely statistically, but it is possible. Set these goals. Everybody listening right now that building a startup has a goal that's his big honking goal. However, what if you could fast forward to that goal right now and be at that goal?
Yeah.
How sure of you that life would be dramatically different? This is where it gets wonky, right?
This is where it gets wonky. I mean, we did a full episode on this, like kind of like play testing your dreams. Remember, we talked about like, well, like just if you want to, you think you want to retire at 50, play test it for 3 or 4 weeks at 40 and see if it's really what you want, right? Like we talked about, like I wanted to go fishing, move to Florida. It's like I could fish every day. I can't. I can fish 2 days a week maximum. Bought myself a kayak. Was like, I'll bet the next step is a boat. Nope. I loved my kayak. Didn't need more than that. It was perfect. Right. So it's like, as you start down these paths, sometimes you realize that like the goal that you set at the beginning gets recalibrated as you start to achieve the stuff that happens along the way. One of two things happens. You realize I actually don't need that thing, or you realize the effort to get to that next thing is significantly higher than what it took me to get here. And therefore the ROI on it's not going to be what I thought. I won't go after it.
I've always said for a long time that the value of anything is the fact that you don't have it.
You don't have it. Yep.
Right. And I say that because whenever I didn't have something, I placed so much value on it. And let me give you kind of different dynamics that could play into this. If you're in a really bad relationship, personal relationship with your spouse, then in your mind, that relationship being fixed or replacing with another one that, isn't terrible is going to make you so much happier and you're going to be so much a different person. If you don't have money, you have all these, past due bills and woes, etc. When you have money, you'll be fine. The list goes on and on and on. It creates a trap for us. And this is the part that it took me 30 years to figure out. It creates a trap where we can conveniently believe that if we have something we don't have, that we will be fundamentally different on the other side. What we never get our heads around is, if I'm an asshole before money, I'll likely still be an asshole after money. Right?
Yep.
Or whatever your thing is. If you're the person that always got in fights in your relationship, when you find your next relationship, you're probably still the person that always gets in fights. You're just now getting in fights with someone else.
Someone else. Yep. Well, I haven't had nearly as many fights with this person because we haven't been together for nearly as long.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so I want to start by talking about how we kind of sensationalize the other side of these goals without having a real good understanding of whether or not getting to that goal is really going to change anything. Because in my experience, having gone after a gazillion goals, I would say, I'm making this up, 10% of the time the goal was worth it, which is shocking to me. Which is shocking.
So I would draw a distinction. I'm curious your thoughts. Like they're worth it versus what you expected, right? If 10% of the time the goals were worth it, would you say 10% of the time it was exactly what you expected? Like, I got this thing, now I feel this much better about life, and it's exactly how I expected it to go?
I would say in most cases, the joy of accomplishing that goal was so insanely short-lived comparative to the work it took to get there that it was like, what the hell, man? And again, I think when people consider, I want to have these big goals, my startup has these big goals, I want to make my startup huge. Do you? Right? Like, do you actually know that that's going to work out for you? It usually does not, right? You're usually miserable by the time you get there. Where I was most surprised in life, and this is, again, all mapping back to goals, was how often I would set goals that I'd work insanely hard to accomplish. I'd get the trophy, the thing, whatever it is I was trying to get to, and the amount of value it drove to me was freakishly low.
Yeah, it's your point. The value of something is the fact that you don't have it. We were talking to a group of guys a couple of weeks ago talking about like, investments later in life stuff. Like, what is it? What do you want to amass? What do you want to have? And then somebody posed the question, well, as you're thinking through that, like, what are the most rapidly depreciating assets? And I jokingly immediately responded, I was like, mine, right? Basically meaning that like once I have it, right? Like, now that's not entirely true, right? If you're talking about purely monetary standpoint, sure, owning a piece of real estate, whatever, yeah, it has continued value to some degree. But to your point, like the reason we set the goal in the first place and we set out to accomplish it, the importance of that tends to diminish kind of the minute we hit it. And particularly founders as a group, I don't know if there's anybody that's maybe professional athletes or the people like that, where it's like the minute I have a Super Bowl ring, the only thing that's going to make me happy is the second one. But founders, like the second we set a goal, we chase it maniacally. The second we accomplish it, we replace it with another, like that.
But the longevity of the benefit is way less than we think it is. Now let me give you some examples. So someone will say, well, if you sold your company for $100 million and you took 20 million off the table, that 20 million lasts you forever and longevity is forever. So your argument's bullshit. Not exactly. Yes, numerically, the money's in the bank. I get that. What you're missing when you say that is you think that you are going to be okay. And here's what everybody will say, and I get this argument, except that it winds up being wrong. They say, well, look, I have a bunch of stuff I can't afford right now, right? I can't afford mortgage or to buy a house anymore. Yeah. I can afford you name it. And when I have money, when startup creates money and I have money, I can buy those things. So you're totally wrong. I don't have I get that. What you're missing is once you've done that, you picture yourself in a headspace, an emotional space, a feeling of being fulfilled that rarely ever comes true. And Ryan, you and I talked about this on other podcasts where founders sell their business and they think that all these things are going to come with the sale of their business. Yeah. And it actually makes it worse, which is really interesting to me.
Right. I sold my business and my identity. I sold my business and all my daily routines. I sold my business and all my friends and the people that I talk to every day, right? Like all of these things went out the door with it.
Right.
And now you're sitting there with money in the bank and an absolute identity crisis and no idea what to do next.
Right. And look, I mean, again, if you have the choice between being broke with an identity crisis and rich with an identity crisis, I'd recommend
it's easier rich. For sure.
You can always give it away. However, what I'm trying to get at when we're talking about what our goals we're supposed to accomplish is that we set these goals with a bit of a false premise. We set these goals with an idea that once I achieve goal, more things will change and more importantly, sustain than I ever thought they would. Okay. So let's assume, we can say, hey, okay, maybe that's true. But there's another side of it too, which is once you do accomplish this goal, whatever it is, you get a dopamine hit. Let me give you an example. Back in the 90s, when I was young, God, it's so long ago, Jesus. Back in the 90s when I was young, I had this dream, like I think a lot of people did back then and probably whatever the equivalent is now, that one day I would be able to afford a white BMW 3 Series. Why was it white? I don't know. It was the 90s. It was the thing.
That was the target.
It was definitely a BMW 3 Series. And in my mind, because I was driving the biggest piece of shit ever, it was called an Audi 5000, which in its heyday was actually a beautiful car. I did not own it in its heyday. That thing was so beat up, Ryan, that the entire exhaust on the bottom was held to the chassis by coat hangers.
Yeah.
Right? Which is the only thing I could afford.
Yeah. For a short period of time.
It would melt off as time would go. It was so bad that when I drove it to the dealership to trade it in for a white BMW 3 Series, that the car shut off. Like I'm just driving it and the car just shut off while I'm driving it. Yeah, not dangerous at all. And I coasted into the dealership and parked it, got out and handed him the keys. Like that's
on one hand, you have to, I would love to have known what was going through the salesperson's head at that point. Because on one hand, they're like, this guy definitely needs a car. And yet,
can't leave without one.
And yet, based on how he arrived, is he actually going to be able to buy one?
You bet. And so I'll never forget this moment of pulling out of the dealership in a white 3 Series BMW. And Ryan, I was over the moon. I thought I had won at life and everything was going to be perfect thereafter. Okay. And it was for well over 24 hours. Right. For well over 24 hours, I had won it.
5 years in the making.
Yeah.
48 hours in the enjoying.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was such a perfect kind of microcosm of what I would start to learn about goals. Goals are really valuable until you get them. And then on the other side of it, you never quite picture what it's going to be like. I was talking to a car guy, another founder, Actually, we've referenced him before on the podcast. David Hannemeyer Hansen from
Yeah, yeah.
Basecamp. David's like crazy cart guy, and I remember like back in the day, he had like a $700,000 Pagani or whatever it was. I mean, like he's way into car. He's a massive car collection, whatever. I was talking to him about this, and he said I think the 3 Series BMW was his first car. Maybe it was a Porsche.
The first big purchase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying to me in his Danish accent, I'm not going to try to replicate it. He's like, Will, buying that, I think it was a Porsche. He's like, buying that Porsche gave me 90% of the satisfaction that I would ever get from buying a car. He's like, I tried everything afterward, right? Like his car collection is sick. He's like, but nothing ever even came close to the satisfaction of getting that first car. And basically what he was saying, and I felt the same way, is that BMW gave me 90% of the satisfaction I'd ever get from getting to that goal. Because I was going, from nothing to something. And ever since then, myself, I've probably bought 20 exotic cars since then. And nothing even gave me 10% the value of the satisfaction.
Which is funny because the increment of dopamine becomes significantly smaller. The increment of cost to go up to those higher levels becomes significantly higher. Right? Well, you're paying more and more money to receive less and less joy, whatever outcome that you wanted.
But there's another side. Yes, 100%. But Ryan, there's another side of it. This is what messed with me and has messed with me ever since. And it's probably what's been messing with me in the last year. I now know that what that next level is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think a year or two later, I went out and I bought like a Lamborghini. And I was like, oh my God, it doesn't get better than this. And it was awesome for like 24 hours. And then I realized that the amount of time, effort, cost, whatever you attach to increasing the goal didn't have anywhere near the payoff. And here's what's interesting, which made me not want to do it, right? It's kind of like Tom Brady saying, hey, I've got 8 Super Bowl rings. Like after the first one, just none of them really brought me anything. I just kept doing it because I thought that's what Tom Brady does. I don't really want to do this anymore because it's killing my body, right? I don't need the money, right? Blah, blah, blah. I think something interesting happens when you accomplish some of these goals. And you realize that the value of going back and setting more doesn't have a payoff. I think that messes with you.
It does. I mean, like, and it's an interesting and dangerous curve to be on, right? Because depending on when it happens, like, so what if we're like, actually hitting 100,000 in MRR for the business probably won't bring you that much more joy. Fuck it. I'm not gonna move. And look, that might be absolutely fine. I think it depends on what you set out to accomplish. Why, do you have investors? Do you have a big team that's all expecting you to do these things? Did you make those promises? If you didn't, then I think it's okay to reconsider these things. But it is interesting because I think that like early on, I think there were some important milestones that kind of needed to be hit. You talked about it a little bit. It was kind of like the ones that are, safety or survival more so than just I want a thing. And so I think that there are a number of those that once you've accomplished them, there is probably a longer lasting effect than we give credit to. Like some of my early goals on accomplishing them did 3 things for me.
Okay.
1, they gave me the immediate whatever it was, right? So like sold the first company, got cash, right?
Yeah, right.
Cool.
Right.
Got cash. Now the cash doesn't last forever. Dopamine hit of achieving that thing of building a business to that doesn't last.
Right.
Whatever. What did last was a bit of a safety net that came from that. Right, which allowed me to make different decisions going forward. That did last to some degree. The other thing that lasted was the memory that I could do that. Right,
Agreed.
And that was an asset that I definitely carried forward. It's like once you've accomplished something, you're capable of it. It sets a new save point for you, and you can kind of continue to build up from there. So I think that's one that we lose. But I also didn't need to sell 5 companies to know that I could do that. Right, 1 was enough.
Well, let's build on that a little bit because I think there's some important points in there. The first thing I want to point out is that I see 2 different goal paths, if you will, for everyone. One is what I consider the pleasure and lavish path when people are like, oh, he buys a $100,000 BMW kind of thing, right? Like that's just, pure pleasure. But the other path is around pain, the avoidance of pain. Okay. Can't pay my bills. Can't make, can't do a doctor visit, things like can't feed my family kind of thing.
It's eat and eat caviar, right?
Yeah. And so I think initially most of us are just trying to avoid pain.
Right.
And the truth is, for most of the world, pain is the baseline. There's a significant amount of pain. And relieving that pain vis-a-vis security is our number one goal. And that is an incredibly important goal. No question about it. However, for those folks, let's talk again, founders, that's our world. For those folks that achieve it, initially they are so distracted by that pain that they just assume that when that pain goes away, that they will be happy and satisfied and all these things.
Yeah.
Here's what's really interesting. That rarely happens. It rarely happens. The difference is they just aren't focused on pain. Let me give you just a different take on that.
We create new pain that we then feel like we have to go solve.
I've watched this over and over, particularly with founders, right? Because we're so used to commanding our destinies. And so it throws us when we command our destinies, get what we want, and then don't have the results we expected. This podcast. And so one of the interesting things I found is that when you are in pain, now I'm going to use physical, actual pain, right? You've hurt something. You've had a chronic condition. I've had a chronic condition that is egregious amounts of pain. At the time, all you want to do is get rid of pain. But something happens where you do, right? You and I both gone through, significant health struggles, and we've found a point where we got on the other side of it. Once you've removed pain, it doesn't necessarily make you happy. It just makes you relieved that you don't have pain. See, it's different, right? People think like, oh, I'm in a bad relationship with my spouse, and so if we just break up or settle or whatever, that all of a sudden I'll be happy. No, you just won't have pain. It's not the same as you'll be happy.
It's the difference between running from something and running towards something.
Correct. And so a lot of our goals are about relieving pain initially. And I would argue that phenomenal goal. But once you've relieved pain, right? And now you're just looking at it strictly from the standpoint of how do I increase pleasure, happiness, whatever you call it. That's where it starts to get a little gnarly because it's actually way harder to do than people think. A lot of people think if I have more money, I'll just be able to have more free time, be able to go on more vacations, etc. It doesn't work like that. Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists, you may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it.
Mo money, mo problems, man. We've all heard it. It's true to a large degree. I think that there's something interesting here, which is as you're talking through this, I started to think about it in just slightly different terms and came to a realization that at both ends of the spectrum, right, whether we're talking these early goals or later goals, there's an existential component to both, at least in my case.
Yeah.
The first goals were get to that safety baseline, right? Existential in the sense of how do I continue to exist? How do I survive? And then the later goals became more around why am I here? Right? Existential on a very different level.
Right. Yeah.
But what was crazy was I don't really remember there being a transition point between those. Ergo, I didn't understand. I'm now safe. I can now just focus on these kind of more cerebral things. I can be more focused on the why. And I guess one of the big questions is at some point, why are we still chasing? Which we've answered in a lot of different ways today, and we've talked about other podcasts. But I think that was an interesting realization for me is that they were both existential, just at kind of different ends of that spectrum. And I'm not really sure how I'm going to reconcile this now. Can't land this plane, Will.
Let me build on this a little bit. So one, we're trying to get rid of pain. Right. In whatever forms that affects us. And let's say we do that. We get rid of pain. The absence of pain is not pleasure. It's just the absence of pain. Right. Yep. And I think that's when you're in pain, literally you and I have been quite physically, all you give a shit about. You're like, pleasure. I don't care. I just don't want to be in pain.
Just get me back to neutral. I'll be fine. I'll be great.
You bet. But for folks, let's take this back to, career, startup, et cetera. For founders who are like, hey, if I become super successful, then I'll be happier. That is a giant myth. Now, you will have the absence of pain, but that is not the same as happiness. And that's what really messes with us. Okay. Yeah. But let me zoom out a little bit further. The idea is that once we hit whatever those milestones are, let's say we've already made it past the video game level that is getting out of pain. Right?
Yep.
And now we're just trying to maximize for pleasure, enjoyment, happiness, fulfillment, etc. Those milestones, those goals, if you will, are really hard to come by. Really hard to come by. And one of the tricky things about them is that you can quickly realize that more effort actually doesn't buy you anything. Let me build on that. Hence where I'm at right now in life. Okay. Right now, buying another car, I already know is not going to give me any more fulfillment. right? As you know, I drive a pickup truck, and I tend
Yeah.
to what's in the shop. But yes, but like buying another car isn't going to do that. More vacations isn't going to make me more happy, right? For
Right.
me, building things, like creating things makes me happy. But one of the things that's really messed with me, Ryan, over the past year or two is for the first time in my life, it's like I know better that yes, I can put myself on some ridiculous goal. And it
Yep.
kind of sucks to know
Yeah. Yeah.
that I already know it's not going to work.
Yeah. Look, I think there's this sense that as we go from feed me to fulfill me, that it becomes significantly more difficult, right? Like we're climbing the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like we get to self-actualization, which is where you're at. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we realize like summit's kind of fucking flat, right? And the view from here is basically the same as. So I think, for me, as we're talking through this, I'm realizing that in some of my most successful goals, and I don't mean that in terms of the size, the outcome, anything else,
Yeah.
I was as satisfied by the chase of the goal, right? So the accomplishment was satisfactory, but I need to go back and kind of do some calculus on what was it that made me engage throughout the process, right? So I wasn't simply doing it because of the endpoint, but like truly like the entire pathway was something that I wanted to be able to do. I go back to things like coaching Hannah's first soccer team. We won the league that year by leaps and bounds. But that's not the part that was like the coolest for me. The coolest part for me was like the individual little moments of like that kid that had never scored a goal, that nobody ever thought was going to score a goal, who never scored a goal, but we made her into a great goalie. Just kidding. No, she scored a goal. Right. So it's like, what are these things along the way, right? Can we find fulfillment and of course we've all heard this, right? You have to enjoy the journey, not the destination. Sure.
You know who
But
says that,
also,
Ryan?
yes.
Rich people. Rich people
Yeah.
say dumb shit like that. That you need to enjoy the journey, not the destination. And let me expand on that. As an aside, I'm going to tangent for a half second. I can't stand when rich people give rich people advice, right? Like these platitudes, because I'm like, I always put an asterisk at the end of their quote that says, "If you're rich."
If you're rich. Yeah, exactly. You can just hear it, right?
Yeah,
Comes out in the expression they make after they finish. It's the smug look says, if you're rich. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, great advice from you, rich guy, because that now applies to you, right? Like,
Yeah.
money isn't everything if you're rich.
If you have it.
Like
Yeah.
you already have it. Yeah. Try not having it. I never felt that way, right? But what I was gonna say is what's been interesting to me about, kind of chase the journey, enjoy the journey, etc. It is true. But I would say this a bit different. The journey is very different if you already know you've won. So in other words,
Yeah. In which direction?
how do you mean?
For better, for worse there.
Oh, well, I mean, there's the question. I look at it like this. When someone says you should really enjoy the journey, dude, when I didn't know if I was going to be able to eat at the end of the week,
No.
there's no part of me that was like,
I'm not
oh,
talking about the
so much fun.
existential. I'm not talking about the feed me side. I'm saying you said we were past those,
Oh,
right? We were
that's when you've already won. If you're optimizing for pleasure, right? If you're saying, I want to go from $100,000 car to $250,000 car, then you can say dumb shit like enjoy the journey, right? Because you've already won.
right.
Right?
You're already driving the white BMW,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Like,
exactly.
The ride's already fine. Yeah.
Like I just my frustration, and I try to be mindful of this coming out of my mouth as well, is using platitudes like enjoy the journey with like
Yeah.
almost like complete like disassociation from what people in the journey
The
are actually
reality of
dealing with, right?
their experience. They're like,
Like,
enjoy the journey of not making payroll again this week. Which part of that is fun? Logging into Gusto and seeing the negative balance. Like which part of it, right? Like figure out who I'm gonna let go, letting them know, hey, look, I know you got fired today, but don't worry about the outcome of being fired. Enjoy the journey. By which I mean pack up your desk and yeah.
I think about it in terms of you were mentioning soccer, right?
Yeah.
I think there is a point where you realize that winning at soccer isn't going to really change your outcome, but playing soccer is going to be awesome. I've been trying to change that mentality. Like it's a luxury to have, if I'm being honest, to be able to say, if we grow startups.com to 100x what it is now and sell it for $1 gazillion, it literally won't change my life. And that's not because I'm so incredibly rich. It's because I just don't actually need anything else.
Yeah.
Right. Like I just financially, like there's nothing that I want that requires so much cash that I have to do something extraordinary to get it. Now, that's not the same as saying that like my ambition is gone, it just magically disappeared. It's saying that for the first time in my life, there's not a material object on the other side of it, which is weird for me.
It is. I think part of it is just saying like, look, I don't have to have, because there's nothing that I'm being ambitious towards. Doesn't mean that I'm not still driven in some way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that same ambition. I think it's trying to swap fuel sources in the middle of a drive.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how do I say like, look, I don't have to be scared anymore. I don't have to run towards things. And there's nothing that I really want so bad, but for some reason, maybe this is the big question we need to ask ourselves, but for some reason, I still feel like I need to want something. I need to want to at least look useful. I want to be in motion. I want to be productive. I want those things, but those things untethered from a specific goal are hard to achieve. And so I think this is why we come back full circle and go, so I guess I need a goal.
So here's what I've been kind of discovering, if you will. I've been discovering that for me, for the first time in my life, attaching my effort to a trophy doesn't buy me anything. It's a weird thing to say, right? It's a weird thing to say. But for example, I do not want a private jet. Now, I say that to say private jets are wildly expensive, right? Like no matter how you do it, no matter how you cut it, they're wildly expensive. And for people who have, great wealth or want to achieve great wealth, a private jet is like part and parcel to what they want. I've ridden on private jets. They terrify me. They're just too small. And my wife won't get on one. Now, I'm saying that to say it's not like we're riding private jets all the time. And my wife has these decisions to make. She's been on a few and she's like never going to do it again. Point is, that's one of the biggest like financial achievements you can get. I actually just don't want
a signal. Yeah.
So stick with that. I don't want a second house. We did a second house for a decade. It sucked. Always felt like we had to be at the other house. It was awful. I'm grateful, wildly grateful that I had that experience.
Yeah.
But now having had it, I also know I don't need it. And again, going back to the cars and everything else, I am shocked at this point in my life, actually truly shocked, Ryan, how much I don't want. Now, I say this in a backdrop, of building my dream home, which is, a huge thing for me. But what was most interesting about, building a home and, as involved as I've been, is it feels like the last thing I've ever wanted. And that makes me a little bit sad.
I was going to say, yeah, that's probably going to drive anxiety in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
It's like the sense that you're getting closer to achieving that thing, right? Which has taken, decades on one hand, but just even since the point of starting,
long run,
right? It's been a 5-year process. I remember the first time we were talking about this, like you're looking at the land, you're starting to do the 3D renderings, all that stuff. It's been a long time ago, half a decade ago. But now is like, as you're nearing the completion of that milestone, right? The achievement of this one without a next quest feels a bit like idling in neutral, right? Like engine revving, nowhere to roll. Like we're not good at this.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great way to put it. Like I wasn't built for not achieving goals. And yet at the same time, I'm in a place where I know that just creating more goals for the sake of creating more goals is kind of a bullshit exercise. Yep. So kind of what I'm saying is I'm trying to learn to do the things that I enjoy, not because I get a trophy, but because I really enjoy doing them. I'll give you an example.
Wait a minute. Are you back to enjoying the journey, Will?
No, no, I'm not going to enjoy the journey. No, I'm kidding. Like, for example, I play, hockey with buddies.
But that's actually a great point. Cause like at some point, like playing another game of hockey isn't a journey because it's not going anywhere. It's just another game and that's okay.
We had some guys that I was on the job site with, we were building our house last week. And they were basically saying, aren't you really excited that, when this house is going to be done? We're supposed to be done in a few months. And I said, well, one, it'll never actually be done because I'll be working on this thing forever. But number two, I said, the whole point of doing this was to build it, to actually physically learn how to build things, learn how to build cabinets, learn how to do architecture, learn how to do all these things myself, and having a big honking, like wildly overwhelming goal, which is the nature of what we do as founders, and knowing that I could like count on myself to build it with my bare hands. Right. I mean, I think, and I don't want to be sexist here, but like as a dude, like provide shelter for family. Feels like something you're near and dear to who, my identity.
I'll be there to make the fire the day you open the place. Well, I'll handle that side of it.
Exactly. Caveman style. So no, but my point is, I think what's been interesting about it is the folks I was talking to last week were like, hey, if this house were already built, would it have been worth buying? And I said, absolutely not. No. I said, we're not building this because we need a house. We already have a house and we love our house. We're building it because I wanted to create something from scratch that felt like a penultimate moment in my life. Kind of like here's a great way to say it, as it felt like the result of 30 years of effort.
It's a trophy, right?
It's
a trophy of sorts.
It's a trophy, and it's got a very like cathartic milestone. You know what it is, Ryan?
Sure.
It's something that says, hey, dude, mission accomplished, you're good. And I haven't had a mission accomplished, you're good in 31 years in my career.
We're just definitely got to be a follow-up episode on this. Once you wake up in jammies in that house, and we have to go, okay, so did the dopamine last more than 48 hours, right? Or now that you've got it, it won't, right? We sort of know it won't.
But stick with that, because, and again, if folks are listening to this, that, I'm trying to be open about my feelings and my thought process, so you can kind of just see what's in my head. I already know that, like, hey, once you get the keys to the 3 Series BMW and you drive it off the lot, the value,
Yep.
not just financially but emotionally plummets. It's not that. It's knowing that I'm not going to need a bigger house, right? And if I do, I would love to find out what the use case for that one is.
Will has been banned from driving in all 50 states, so he had to build a house big enough that he can drive around inside.
So that's kind of off the table. Said differently, too, like, my kids will leave the house, presumably, like, within the next 10 years, and I literally would have no need for a bigger house. My point is, I kind of know this is as much house as we'll ever need. And with that, there's a great calming feeling to that, like a finality to it, right? Like feeling like you've gotten to the end of an important journey. But also, here's what's interesting. I also don't have any expenses after this. In other words, I don't want a boat. I don't want a second house.
Yeah.
I don't want a jet. All the things that people buy with a bunch of money. I don't want any of that stuff. Like, my my big purchases right now have to do with attachments to my skid steer.
I was getting ready to say, like, it's another attachment for the Bobcat.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying is, as folks are thinking through their careers, their progressions as founders, we rarely think about, what does the end game look like? Is part of of a measure of success, if you will, the lack of needing more things. Right now, you could get real Buddhist and say we should never need them to begin with, but that's not my point.
But yeah, no, I think it is. And I think then it goes from being like, we go from playing like really big games with really big trophies, to micro games or infinite games.
Yep.
Right? I think that's kind of where, like, it's funny, like, as I've been really unpacking the decision to move to Madrid, like, for me, like, we've got a lot of reasons for the kids, the family overall. Like, there's a lot of reasons we want to do this. As I've been looking at the ones where, like, because you get to those points where you're like, you've justified lots of other ways, but you're like, okay, but why am I actually really? Because I've had to push hard to make this happen, right? And so why am I actually doing this? And I think part of that was that I feel like it will help me with some of those infinite games, because at some point, I mean, like, this is like why a lot of people turn to philanthropy at some point, right? They're like, well, I have all the stuff I need, so now I'm just going to become a philanthropist. I almost said philanderer. That was not what I meant. I literally almost said philanderer. So what do I mean by, like, the infinite game? So it's things like mentorship or creative crafts, legacy projects, like continuing to play soccer. Like, there's an end point for that, right? There is definitely a point at which I can no longer continue that pursuit because my body just simply won't keep up with it. But until then, right, that's one of those things. But, like, those don't necessarily have the same kind of outcome, right? Like mentorship, for example, right? There will always be someone new to mentor, or the mentee will always have elevated goal. Like, they'll be in the same situation where, like, well, it'll help them accomplish their goals. But, like, for you, for the house, you've said this before. It's like, you're going to spend, it took you 50 years to build it, and you're going to spend the next 50 like tinkering with it and adding onto it and doing all this stuff around it, right?
Yep.
So I think, to me, that's kind of what it turns into. It becomes the infinite games where we specifically design them so that there is no endpoint, so we can just keep playing.
Okay, so stick with that for a second. The just keep playing. I always use Tom Brady as an example because he just, to me, he just seems like such a penultimate success story. Again, I don't know the guy. He might be a giant ass. But point is, there's a version in this where Tom Brady is like, you know what? I've won Super Bowls. I get it. Yes, I'm capable of winning a Super Bowl. But, I just like passing the ball around in the backyard to my kid or with my friends. And I just enjoy the game of playing football. I don't need to win Super Bowls to do it. I just want to enjoy what it is. Ryan, is how I feel about our jobs at startups.com. Startups.com becomes 100 times bigger. I honestly don't know that it changes our lives whatsoever.
To a large degree, I hope it wouldn't. Right? I love what we do. I want to keep doing it. Like, to the extent that if it became 100 times larger and it meant that we didn't get to do some of the things that we do now, I would not want that, in fact.
We're not going out of our way to keep it small either.
Right.
The point is, we're at a point where we already get to do the things that we enjoy the most. Would that improve a few things in the future? Of course it would. But the idea being, we're enjoying what we get to now, but this is the equivalent of us as Tom Brady in the backyard just throwing the ball around just because we actually enjoy it. If I were to think about an evolution of goals, right? My thought is this. Ideally, everyone listening achieves all of their goals. I sincerely hope that happens. And when it does, and when you get to that point where you've achieved so many things in life that you've wanted to achieve, I hope you get to the point that I know I'm working through right now, and Ryan, I'd like to believe you are too, that at some point you say, my goal is to be able to do the things I love without consequence, without goal. Without something that prevents me from not doing it. We're not doing it for the wrong reasons. Not doing it because I get a car at the end of it. Doing it because I just love being covered in sawdust, building something that never existed before, or spending time with someone that I love while I'm doing it, and being able to just create for the sake of creating. I think, yes, we might run out of goals, but we'll never run out of the passion that gets us to our goals. And I think that kind of passion is what we need to develop if we're going to be able to do this pretty much forever.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.